Hey guys, what's up? Jay here with JayzTwoCents, bringing you a video that I think is going to help a lot of you out. Now, with the introduction of Project Red Mist in my last video, obviously we're doing some pretty extreme water cooling. And I've sort of, over the last year and a half, become sort of an expert on the topic of water cooling here in the community, considering I've been doing it now for well over 10 years. I've been doing it back since when we were modifying aquarium equipment in our systems to water cool our stuff. There was no such thing as frozen CPU or performance PCs or any of that stuff, or specific water cooling radiators for your computer. That stuff didn't exist, man. We were taking old heater cores from cars and using those as radiators and making all the brass fittings from Home Depot do the work. So I decided I'm going to bring you a commentary and talk about the most common misinformation and myths that I see when it comes to water cooling, and try and debunk those for you today, so I can help you determine whether or not that is going to be the right move for cooling your custom systems. Now, traditionally, a commentary means that you guys get to see first-person perspective of some sort of a shooter game, typically Call of Duty. You guys know how I feel about Call of Duty, so we're not going to do that. But I thought I'd bring you something unique today and kind of give you an over-the-shoulder perspective of my NVIDIA surround setup with some Assetto Corsa driving simulator, because as you can see, I got a Logitech G27. And you guys may or may not know this, but back in the day, I used to have some highly modified cars. One of them specifically set up for road racing, was sponsored by Ibach and Hotchkiss, and so I really used to be heavily into the road racing scene. In fact, I even had my racing license for a while there. So I figured it'd be cool to kind of give you guys an over-the-shoulder perspective of me getting used to the new simulator here, while we go ahead and talk about the topic at hand, which will be voiced over. So you guys will be watching me drive while I voice that over. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about common misinformation and misconceptions and myths when it comes to water cooling your computer. Alright guys, so just a real quick note about the simulator here. It is Assetto Corsa, as I mentioned, and I am going to be running on full manual mode with clutch and shifter. All the assists turned off. Now I'm going to have a driving line going because I'm not very familiar with the track here, so I just want to know the braking and acceleration points of the track. But other than that, this is an open track day. There's 3 classes here running in this, so we're going to have a whole lot of fun. So hopefully I don't make a complete ass of myself here on the track. Even though it's single player, I don't want to make an ass to you guys, especially since I just bragged that I used to do this sort of thing. So anyway, here we go. Okay guys, let's do this here. Water cooling your PC, things that you hear that just simply aren't true. Now I get this all the time, all the time I get these messages, and it's from people that are repeating things that they've heard from somebody else that they think is true. Now, common misconception number 1 is that water cooling your computer is dangerous. Now, that is absolutely true in many perspectives, but I would say it's only going to be as dangerous as the quality of parts at which you buy. Now, just like anything else, you are going to be taking a certain amount of risk when it comes to water cooling your computer. I mean, if you're having fluid move around your system. Now, your system is not waterproof. I mean, they do have water-resistant motherboards. ASRock has one of those, but there's no such thing as a fully waterproof system. Now, what people will often try and do to basically make you believe that you can have a waterproof system is by going with a non-conductive fluid. Now, let's go ahead and talk about what a non-conductive fluid is. Technically, distilled water in its pure format is a non-conductive fluid. Water in itself is actually very low in conductivity. What is actually making it conductive is the minerals and a lot of the other contaminants that you find in water, specifically water that's carried through metal pipes, or it's contaminated by your faucet, and just depending on where it's stored, it could be picking up minerals from in a container. Water is not pure, especially when it comes out of the faucet. So that's why you have distilled water. It's a special process that the water goes through that makes it even more purified than purified water. So because of this, people will often ask me, Jay, are the non-conductive fluids worth it? Now here's the way I feel about non-conductive fluids. Non-conductive fluids are worth it if you're a first-time builder that you may be afraid of having some sort of a leak in your system at its first boot or in the beginning of when you first start water cooling. Now, the problem with water cooling fluids that claim to be non-conductive is that they eventually become conductive for the very same reasons that I explained, that tap water becomes conductive by the time it comes out of your faucet because of the fact that it's picking up all kinds of ions and minerals. Now, how can it be picking up ions and minerals or different types of metal in your loop? Well, think about it. All of your blocks, your radiators, the pump, it all has metal in it. Eventually, over time, as it's constantly in contact with these metals, the metals will break down in a microscopic format that eventually create conductivity and contaminants in these non-conductive fluids. So, if you take the time to build the system right, my recommendation to you would be to realistically not go with these quote-unquote non-conductive fluids. They tend to carry a very hefty price tag. They also can tend to be somewhat toxic, believe it or not. I mean, they do have non-conductive fluids out there that have much better anti-corrosive built into them, but they also tend to have some contaminants in there that are not entirely environmentally friendly. Now, I'm not speaking out of tree hugger or let's go green type of side of my mouth. I'm basically just telling you that if you're gonna potentially have a spill, or you're gonna flush your system, you're not gonna want to go dumping these fluids down your gutter or down your garbage disposal into your sewer or your septic tank. It's just not a very good idea. My honest recommendation when it comes to fluids for you would be to really consider distilled water. It's cheap, it's easy to replace, and it's readily available at the grocery store for $1, typically, maybe $1.50, depending on where you live. And it's easy to use. And if you spill it, you're not going to hurt anything on your carpet or your desk or your clothes or anything like that. Now, common misconception that you also hear regarding fluid is that going with fluid that have dyes in them are going to gum up and gunk up your system. Now, that's partially true. Fluids have come a long way in the last few years when it comes to advances in technology, when it comes to getting the pigments and the colors that companies want to allow you to customize your system with, without having a lot of the gel type dye in there that typically is what falls out of the fluid and gums up in the lowest portion of your loop or inside of your tiny micro fin blocks. Typically your CPU block has the smallest fins in it, and it tends to gum up in there if you're going to have a fluid that is known to gum up. Now, some colors are more prone to gumming up than others. Red is notorious for being the most unfriendly color dye that you could possibly use in your loop for many reasons. One, typically dye that is red will eventually gum up. It's study after study after study and test after test after test on all of these water cooling forums will show you that red dye is notorious for this. Red dye is also notorious for being nearly impossible to flush out of your loop. I mean, I had red dye and I ended up trying to clean it out of my radiators to the point to where no matter what I did, boiling it, vinegar, using actual radiator flush, I used gallons and gallons and gallons of this stuff to try and clean out my radiators with red EK dye. I could not get the red out. What would happen is my fluid would turn a slight purple color because it was purple dye that they used to make their red base. So it got to the point where I ended up actually replacing the radiators altogether to get rid of my red dye. Now, common misconception I hear when it comes to temperatures of water cooling is, wow, you have a lot of radiators. Your room must not get hot. I mean, if we have gaming computers, you guys know, for a long gaming session, it can get pretty damn hot inside your bedroom or your gaming room or whatever it is. These computers put out a ton of heat, especially if you have high-end graphics cards that have a lot of watts to displace. Now, the misconception here is that water cooling makes your room less hot. I'm here to tell you that is not true. In fact, in my experience, I have found that water cooling makes your room more hot because instead of having all of the heat sitting inside of your case and the only heat that's making its way out of the case is what your exhaust fans can exhaust, you have the high efficiency of heat transfer from your water blocks to your radiator exhausting directly into the atmosphere. Typically, your radiators have exhaust fans on them, bringing the air straight into the room. Now, because of that, you have a much more efficient heat transfer, meaning more heat is getting out of your system and into the atmosphere, hence the lower temperatures of your CPU and your graphics card. So please, just think, if you're going to do a water cooling system to try and make your ambient room temperature lower while you're gaming, just know you may have an adverse backwards effect that you're actually expecting. You may get the opposite of that, where your room technically gets much hotter. In fact, when I put the second 480 in my system here and I added the second 780, my room temperature went up by at least 5 more degrees over my old system now when gaming, because I've got another 400 watts worth of graphics card that's being displaced into the atmosphere. So the misconception there is that water cooling does not make your room any less hot. Now, another really common misconception that I hear when I see a lot of people who maybe aren't as experienced with water cooling trying to help out other people. Now, I want to go ahead and give kudos to those people trying to help other people, but giving people the wrong information is not exactly helping them. In fact, you're doing them a disservice. Now, what I'm about to say here, plenty of people may have actually thought this and may have actually given this advice, and I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm not looking down on you, but I just want to set the record straight. Increasing your pump speed does not increase your cooling capacity of your system whatsoever. Let me repeat that. Increasing your pump speed does not increase the cooling capacity of your system, period. There is no discussion here. There is absolutely no rebuting this. This has been proven time and time again. The only reason you have higher flow pumps and variable speed pumps is so that 1, you can control the noise, and 2, you can overcome higher restrictions as you put more components in your system. Now, I ended up doing 2 graphics cards, 2 radiators, and a CPU block. So having 2 pumps or 1 pump, because I do have 2 pumps in my system, does not actually give me any better cooling capacity whatsoever. The 2 pumps in my system is for nothing more than the wow factor. It's not increasing the cooling capacity at all. And having my pump on setting 1 versus setting 5 on a basic system will have absolutely no difference in temp whatsoever. So why do we have variable speed pumps? Like I said, it's to overcome the amount of resistance that inevitably grows in your system as you add more components. If you're running a basic CPU block and a single radiator, you can get away with just about any pump that you want. The difference in pumps is going to be how noisy they are, the voltage at which they run at, and whether or not they're adjustable. I tend to like those features, that's why I go that route. But I just want to be clear, the dual pump setup in my system does not increase the cooling capacity. And probably the most common misconception of all is that the order of the components in your loop matter. Absolutely not. The only thing that matters is that your reservoir is directly before your pump and is placed higher than it, so that when you're filling and bleeding your system, gravity will feed the pump and prime it for you. That is the only component order that matters, period. You're not going to increase the temperature of your CPU if you have the water going to your graphics cards first. In fact, if you want to know the truth, I have 2 780s feeding into my CPU before going into another radiator, and it makes absolutely no difference on the temperatures. So you want to find the most convenient path that you can for your loop to make it nice and easily accessible and without looking like, intestines and tubes going every which way because you think a certain order matters. It doesn't. So please hear me when I say that it absolutely doesn't matter what order that your loops are in, or that the components of your loops are in. Just keep these misconceptions in mind, listen to the things I've had to say, and you guys will be just fine if you decide to water cool. Well, there you have it, guys. Second place isn't too bad. Not the cleanest race out there, but anyway, I'm still getting used to this whole, force feedback thing. It doesn't feel exactly like the real thing. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you've learned something today about water cooling, and as always, follow me on Twitter if you want to ask about water cooling, or I'll just see you in my next video.